It's time for our second installment in our class in theology following the Apostles' Creed. We have a lot of ground to cover today, so let's tear right into it. The opening paragraph of the Apostles' Creed says, "I believe in God the Father, Almighty, creator of heaven and earth." Now that's all that it says about God. Next week we'll take a look at the names of God. Names like Father, names like the Almighty, and the character of God, the nature of God. But today we're going to look at how the Apostles' Creed presents God as the creator, the maker of heaven and earth. God in Genesis chapter 1 is the creator. If you have a Bible, open it to Genesis chapter 1. There you'll see that the creation of the world is divided into 7 days. The seventh day is a day of rest, so there are 6 days of creation. And there is a parallelism that's followed. In day 1, God creates light and darkness. Fast forward to day 4. In day 4, God creates sun and moon. In day 2, God creates the waters above the earth, and he separates them from the waters below the earth. On day 5, God creates life in the sky and life in the sea, the waters above the earth and the waters below the earth. On day 3, God creates sea and land, and then he creates plants and animals. And on day 6, God creates animals on the land, and then he creates man and woman. Now, this parallelism of creation is interesting. It just shows the poetic style of the author here. The important thing is what we pick up with the creation of man. We come to the pinnacle of God's creating activity. When God creates man, he says to man, we're looking in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it, reign over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground." At the end of every day, God looks and he says, "This is good." Now this sets us up for chapter 2. Chapter 2 is not a contradictory account of creation. Instead, chapter 2 hones in on the creation of mankind. So, chapter 2, verse 4 starts with the plants and animals already existing. And then God creates man. Now, he creates man in a similar fashion to the way he created animals. Man was formed from the dust of the earth. Chapter 1 tells us that the animals came from the dust of the earth. But when God creates man, he imparts part of himself to man. God breathes into man's nostrils the breath of life. Breath, wind, spirit, it's all the same word in Hebrew. The idea that we get is that God gives man part of himself. He gives him his spirit. So God's spirit now inhabits man. Chapter 2 is also different from chapter 1 in that we don't have this parallelistic presentation of the creation. Instead, we have God saying, "Now I've given you all of this. There are all of the plants enjoy it. You can eat everything except for the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Then, for the first time in creation, God says, it is not good. This stands in a stark contrast to chapter 1, where God's creation is totally good. At the end of every day, it's good. At the end of the seventh day, God sits back and he says, it's very good. But in chapter 2, verse 18, God said, it is not good for man to be alone. And man creates woman. But the creation of woman is far different from the creation of anything else. Woman is created from part of man. I think the implication here, our understanding of man and woman, is that they belong together. There is a special relationship between man and woman that we don't find among other animals in the animal kingdom. Adam himself recognizes it. At last, he says, this is bone from my bone, flesh from my flesh. She'll be called woman because she was taken from man. And then immediately, sort of an editorial comment. That's why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. That was not meant for Adam and Eve. They had no concept at this point of what father and mother was. That was an editorial comment by the author of these verses to the people that were reading them. They knew what a father and mother was. They came centuries later. The editorial comment goes on and says, this is why man and woman are to be together. After the creation of man, we see the problem of sin entering the world. Now, I'm going to assume that you have read Genesis chapter 3, the story of man's fall. We've preached about it and written books about it. There's just a few things that I want to draw to your attention that frequently go unnoticed. The first is that, yes, the serpent spoke to the woman, but the man was apparently right by her the whole time. Mary DeMuth, in her book, The Most Misunderstood Women of the Bible, makes this point in the very first chapter. Adam was a passive observer as the serpent tempted Eve. He didn't do a thing to stop her, and when Eve offered him the fruit, he joined right in. What we do see is the command that God gave Adam in chapter 2 is now completely violated. Adam and Eve both eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and thereby gaining that knowledge. It wasn't so much that the fruit itself contained the knowledge as the act of disobeying God taught them now what evil was. As a result, immediately, God's two commands to Adam in chapter 2, enjoy the garden, and in chapter 1, rule over creation. They're immediately violated. Now, instead of ruling, which means protect, govern, cultivate, care for, there's quite a bit of pastoral language involved in ruling. Now, instead of ruling, man exploits. Now in Genesis chapter 3:16, instead of governing the creation, man now seeks to rule over. He seeks to impose his will. Instead of governing, he's exploiting. And instead of enjoying, he is now desiring, lusting. That's the very same word used for lust. There is lust now instead of simple enjoyment. Sin ruins everything. That's the point. Sin ruins everything.
Now,
Sin does not leave the world. Sin is, if anything, imprinted on our being as human beings. God is the maker of heaven and earth. The Apostles' Creed tells us that.